Right. Good morning, everyone. Please confirm you can hear me by typing a Y in the chat, please. Can anybody hear me? Oops. Oh, great. Okay. So it's 9 o'clock and we'll just start. I trust we're doing well. Welcome to this month's knowledge sharing session. And we are discussing firewall security. So for those of us who don't know, I'm sure a number of us would have heard about firewalls. They are security systems that largely help us monitor or control traffic to an organization's network, right? Now, while we have called them security systems, if you poorly manage it, it can also serve as an attack vector, right? Which could be leveraged to compromise your network. So without wasting too much of our time, our faculty this morning is Nonso Ezeji. He leads the emerging technology assurance team in one of the tier one banks here in Nigeria. He's a CISA, he's a certified cloud security engineer, amongst several other certifications that he possesses. So we'll run through the session in, say, 45 minutes and then spend the last 10 minutes taking questions, right? That's how we'll run. Okay, so the next voice you should hear is Nonso's voice. Nonso?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ogatoni. Good morning, everyone. I sure I'm audible, right?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen so we can jump into it. Uh, Please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, you're.
Okay, all right. So, good morning, everyone, once again. Like Ogatoni said, we're going to be discussing firewall security engineering. Now, the goal of this session would be to look at what are some of the common misconfigurations that are observed, on firewall devices, and how can we, take proactive steps to actually reduce our attack surface. Moving on, the agenda is going to be broken down into six components. We'll be looking at the firewall fundamentals, what are the core concepts, strategic importance. We'll look at the difference between traditional and a next generation firewall. What are some of the common misconfigurations, segmentation and segregation, and the role that the firewall plays in this root causes to some of these misconfigurations occur, and what are some of the remediation strategies that we can take to protect our institutions. All right. At intervals, I'll be asking if I'm still audible to be sure that we're still following. Right. Now, firewall. What is firewall? Right. It's like Bostoni explained, right? It's basically a security device or a software that what it does is to monitor and control network traffic between two zones and based on the rules that you have set out. So I like to use the example of, say you have an event, right? You have an event or a wedding in Lagos, right? Think of the firewall as that security man that stands at the entrance of the event hall. If you do not have a security man there, be rest assured that everybody will go into your event hall, right? And you would have more than you actually budgeted, right? But in having a security person stand at the front of the entrance, right? What you're doing is you're restricting the people that can come into the event to the people that you expect to be at the event. So the security man just stands there and guest A comes, he looks at your invitation card, scans that, okay, yes, this person, maybe there's a barcode on the invitation card. Yes, this person needs to be in the hall. They permit the person to go in, right? There are even some events that have restricted chairs to some people. They also direct you to the specific tables or chairs you're supposed to sit. That is what basically a firewall is doing, right? It looks at the source. Oh, this person's IP is coming. Where is the destination that it is going to? And on what port, right, is that communication allowed to happen? That is what basically firewall is. So firewall, it plays a key role in reducing our attack surfaces, right? In enterprises, it's something we need to know. And they are not just technical controls. They are business enablers that protect our critical assets while maintaining operational continuity. Um, Moving on, I don't want to waste time with the introduction part. Um, Now, firewalls, we have traditional firewalls and we have next generation firewalls, right? And somebody will say, what is the difference between a traditional and a next generation firewall? Now, the traditional firewall does basically IP and port filtering. Now, I'm going to give an instance. So if Noso has an IP of 172.16.24.32, for instance, and Noso is going to a destination or a resource within my data center, right? And the port that has been permitted for Noso to have that communication is, say, a 443 for web service, right? What a traditional firewall would typically do is, okay, the rule says that also IP is permitted to reach this destination and on this port, it permits it, right? And also gains access to that respective server, right? Or in light of the recent times or the recent happenings, threats, the way attack comes these days is no longer restricted to just your source IP and destination IP, right? And that is what the next generation firewall is trying to deal with, right? Now, the next generation firewall is saying, I'm not going to just look at your source IP, destination IP, and port. Come on. The packet that is coming, I want to be able to inspect that payload to check if there is anything malicious in it. So I give somebody or they give somebody a letter and say, oh, take this letter to somebody at Apapa. The dispatch guy will just look at the address and take it to Apapa. What if it contains a letter bomb, right? And that's what the next generation firewall is doing. It gets the letter, is opening the letter to inspect the content of the letter before permitting or before taking the letter to the destination or to the receiver, right? That is what the next generation firewall is doing. So part of what it does is deep packet inspection, which I have explained. It looks at the traffic content, the payload, the packets, trying to detect what is malicious in it. It also does what we call application awareness, right? Now, application awareness is saying that your next generation firewall knows what you are doing, right? It's not just saying that, oh, there is a web traffic flowing, right? It is able to tell you that so-so user went to YouTube, so-so user went to WhatsApp, so-so user went to Zoom, or so-so user visited, any sites. It's able to go granular to bring that specifics. It also works on, based on this deep packet inspection, it examines the packet content, then it matches it against some of the signatures it has, right? Some of the application signatures it has, and that is why it's able to now tell you, oh, this user is going to WhatsApp, this user is going to YouTube, and this user is going to Facebook. Now, one of the other feature I like about the next generation firewall is the threat intelligence integration, right? Now, the next generation firewall actually connects to threat intelligence feeds, right? Now, these feeds can contain blacklisted IP addresses, malicious IP addresses that have been blacklisted, dangerous domains and all that, right? Now, the next generation, because of this integration, right? If someone's IP has been blacklisted, your next generation firewall is able to update itself, right? To ensure that if a traffic is coming from that specific IP, it can reach your source, right? So the threat intelligence integration is one of the core features that you get from a next generation firewall, which you would typically not get from a traditional firewall. And you would agree with me that in this time and season that we are, right, the traditional firewall is not sufficient for the kind of sophisticated cyber attacks that we are witnessing today. Now, this is just to create that distinction between what a traditional firewall would typically do. It has limited visibility. It's just rule sets, basic rule sets, simple, allow, deny, source, destination, ports. But next generation it takes it a notch up, right? Packet inspection, threat intelligence integration, intrusion prevention too. It's capable of detecting and blocking attacks that are happening in real time. So say, for instance, you have a payload that is malicious. It has the ability to look at the behavior. It does a behavior analysis of such packets, right? And if an attack is detected, it blocks it straight up. And these are some of the core, features we get from a next generation firewall. Now, speaking to firewall deployment types. Now, this is based on your organization, right? Now, in my experience, I've been to institutions that, especially large organizations in the financial space, that will typically have a device for data center firewall, right? Maybe another device for perimeter firewall, and then use one device too for extranet. So it actually depends on the structure of the organization. A manufacturing institution, for instance, might not have three sole devices or three separate devices doing data center, extranet, and perimeter. It might have just one or two, right? But it depends on the architecture of your organization. What has your organization decided? But what I'm trying to point here is the fact that you can have a firewall positioned at the data center. Now, what it does is it controls traffic that are coming to the data center. You have your servers. You have a server farm whether within your institution, right? You want to be able to protect the traffic that are trying to access those servers internal to you, which is your data center firewall. That is what it will do. You can have another firewall positioned at the extranet, right? You have third-party access to your organization. There are third parties that connect to your organizations, right? Or partner connectivity. Or if you are in an institution that you have subsidiaries or you have branches, right? And you say that your branches, if they want to access certain resources, you don't want to keep them locally at the branches. You want to keep them maybe somewhere at the head office in the data center, right? So typically, your architecture, I'm saying it differs between institutions. Your organization might say, okay, fine, for traffic coming from the subsidiary or branches, right? Let it come from their extranet to our extranet, right? Before it goes to our data center. So it's a choice organization, tend to make depend on their architecture. But what we're trying to say here is that you can have a firewall that protects all third-party access, right? So if a third party is trying to access maybe a test server that resides in your data center, it comes through your extranet. There is a rule on the extranet that permits that. So from the extranet, it then moves to the data center where there is another rule too that permits that before it can access the resources. So it's based on your organization. You can also have a perimeter firewall, right? If you have DMZ resources that are exposed to the internet, right? You want to be able to protect those DMZ resources, right? So you can have a perimeter firewall for that and also for internet access where required. Now, the reason I am bringing this is because as security guys, we need to be able to understand. It's important we understand first the positioning of the firewall in our institution and what the firewall is actually doing, right? In understanding what the firewall is actually doing, you're able to now have a mental or a clear picture rather of what are some of the anomalies that tend to exist in the firewall, right? So this is just to let us know that depending on your organization, it's a conversation that you can take up with your organization, maybe on a Monday, right? Get the network diagram, have engagement sessions with the administrators to understand how many firewalls do we have? Where are the positions of this firewall? What does this firewall do? Right? It helps your understanding to be able to provide, reasonable assurance that everything is working as it is expected to be. Now, moving on, network segmentation and segregation, right? What is it? So when we talk about segmentation, we are saying break our network into smaller segments or logical segments and enforce controlled communication between them, right? So a typical example would be a three-tier architecture application, right? Where you have the web, you have the application, and you have the database tier, right? Now, you have been to institutions where they say, oh, we have a three-tier application, right? And the web server sits at the DMZ part because it's exposed to the internet, good and fine. Our application and database server sits in our data center, so it's behind the data center firewall, good and fine. Now, what's the communication flow like? This is where you begin to ask for things like your architecture diagram. It gives you, a proper understanding, and that's where you see that. Oh, okay. When users come in, we want them to access the web layer first, right? Um, Nobody is expected to go to the application layer except maybe the administrators, the application support guys. When they want to do certain administration on it, they are the ones that are permitted, right? So typically what it means is external guys come to your web, right? Your web is permitted to talk to your application, and your application should talk to your database. But they do not want any communication between external users or any other user, whether within the institution, right, that are not administrators that should talk to the application server, right? Network well segmented. Now, how do we enforce this segmentation? That's where the firewall comes in, right? Now, the firewall is seen as an enforcer of this rule. So if I'm saying that I want the web to talk to the application, right? On my data center firewall, for instance, what I should be saying as the source IP should maybe be the web server, right? And to the application server. If there is any other rule that is going to permit communication to the application server, it might then be maybe the application support team that are going to the server on certain management ports. Now, I mean things like remote desktop protocol 3389 or SSH port 22, depending on what's your organization, depending on whether it's a Windows, Linux, and what are the management ports that is being listened to, right? Now, the firewall is the person, or is the tool rather, that is going to enforce that segmentation that, okay, fine, on our firewall, we permit the web server to talk to the application server, right? And we do not have any other rule that permits maybe any other user that are not administrators that should communicate with the application server. And on your firewall, typically, if you've seen a firewall, after you have all your rules, you will typically have an implicit deny, right? Meaning that if a traffic is coming and it doesn't match everything I have stated, please deny, right? So if we have permitted a web to application on specific ports, and we don't have any rule that permits any other person, any other phone person to access the application tier, aside from the administrator, successful segmentation is being done. It helps in limiting, certain lateral movements, right? So firewall is always an enforcer of this. Now, when it comes to segregation, now segregation is environments that are completely isolated. We don't want any communication. And in experience, what you typically hear is for engagement is we don't want our test to talk to our production environment, right? We don't want our test to talk to our production environment. In fact, some institutions have it documented policies. We don't want our test to talk to production. We don't even want our dev environment, that's the development guys' environment, to talk to production. They want it to be segregated such that when the developers finish their coding, they have other channels to move it to production. And even when they move it to production, the application support guys are now the ones changing maybe, the connection strings to point to a production resource, right? They want that segregation. They don't want test to talk to prod. They don't want dev to talk to production, right? Very good, if you ask me, right? You're trying to prevent, because in some environments, their test systems are not really as hardened as their production environment, right? So they want that segregation to exist. Now, the firewall again is an enforcer. How does it do this? Right. Now, typically, if you, in large institutions, in very large institutions, and I mean institutions that when you pull up their firewall or when you log into their firewall, you will see up to 4,000 rules, right? Now, if they're performing a cleanup, it becomes quite difficult, right? Especially when they don't have an automated tool, which we're going to see in the later slide, right? Now, to achieve that, what I've noticed is they tend to use a global deny rule, right? This is outside of the default deny. Now, what they do is the firewall processes from top to bottom, right? So let's say you might have number one, number two, number three, number four, the fourth rule. You might see a global deny rule test dev to production. Now, what they do is, this is for large institutions where they have tons of rules. They have several devices acting as DC, data center or extranet or perimeter. Now, what they tend to do is, on that particular global deny rule, you would see a source. The source would be all your test VLANs that exist within the bank or within the institution or within the enterprise, right? You have all your test VLANs, and the destination will be your production VLANs, right? Or your production VLANs, because your production resources are a subset of your production VLAN. Please, can you confirm I'm still audible? Tony, Samuel, am I still audible? So that I know I'm not talking to myself.
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay.
Yes, we
All
can hear
right.
you.
Okay, thank you. So you have a global deny rule where they've set that, oh, all test VLANs, source, destination, production VLAN, deny, right? Now, what this means is, while a cleanup might still be in process, trying to identify all those other rooms that exist within the 4,000, 5,000 rooms that are permitting test to production, right? You want to be able to set that rule up first that prevents such risk from crystallizing, right? So it also helps in achieving some level of segregation, right? Because every test resource that exists is a subset of your test VLAN. The production resource that exists is a subset of your production VLAN, right? So this is another way of the firewall helping to enforce this segmentation and segregation. There is another issue around completeness of the inventory VLAN, but it's something we're going to see later in the later slides. So segmentation and segregation, the firewall's role is an enforcer to ensure that our communication aligns with the defined policy. Now, moving on, what are some of the common, firewall misconfigurations we get to see experience on the field. Now, there are a whole lot. I can tell there are a whole lot, but one thing that is common that I get to see most times is the any to any, right? Now you log into a firewall and you have a rule that permits any source to any destination on any port. So take for instance, I'm logging into your data center firewall, right? And we are seeing any source, any destination, any point. It's it eliminates segmentation. Right. We have already said we are breaking this thing into smaller or logical units to enforce controlled communication, right? Which the firewall is going to do. But you are having a rule on your firewall that now permits anybody to go to anything on any port. It means that Mr. A can afford to now initiate an RDP session to a critical resource, maybe a core solution that exists within your institution, that the application server should be restricted to certain people. You now have an any source to any destination and on any port, right? Now, these are things that are live, right? And the reason for this session is to trigger, some of those checks that we could do on a Monday or on a Tuesday, right? Let's log into the firewall. Let's begin to look for things like NEN, right? In large institutions, when you don't have tools, it can become difficult, right? It can become cumbersome. But you can use the search or filter to start, filtering for where source is 0.0.0.0, slash zero, or destination is 0.0.0/0, right? We're increasing our threat landscape by having rules like this on our firewall, right? It defeats the whole essence of segmentation and it increases our threat landscape, and it's something that we should look out, right, as security guys. Now, another thing that tends to occur is broad IP ranges, right? Broad IP ranges. Now, I'll give you a scenario. So, say you're working in a financial space and you have a critical resource, right? Let's use a database server. You have a database server and your organization is structured in a way that you have database administrators, meaning that their sole responsibility is to administer and manage databases. You have application support guys for the web and application servers, and you have a database guys for database servers, right? Now, within those database team, hypothetically speaking, you can have like 10 database guys, right? And these 10 database guys, your institution might now choose that, oh, okay, fine. Let's give them a static IP, right? Yeah. We give them a static IP to ensure, access to certain resource. So we can go on the firewall and permit their static IPs to access certain resource, right? Now, instead of seeing maybe the 10 guys static IP, or if they've created a group called database, yeah, a database administrators, right? And you expand the group. And when you expand the group, you expect to see 10 objects, 10 IPs of the database administrators. You now open it and you are seeing 172.16.0.0/16, right? That is overly permissive, right? The destination is a critical database server, right? It's a critical database server, and you established that communication on the firewall via maybe a port 1521, 3306, 1821, any of those, database ports, right? And you are permitting 172.16.0.0. That means you're effectively permitting 2 raised power 16, like 65,000 plus usable hosts to actually reach a critical resource that should be restricted to your database administrators. These are things that are happening that we need to check so that we don't expose our systems unnecessarily. Right. So we don't expose our systems unnecessarily. Now, you could even see things like, you see objects like or groups rather. You can see groups like any, right? When you open the firewall, you can see groups like any, right? It is always nice to blob those groups, right? When I say blob, it is nice to expand. Let's see what are the objects, what is contained in this group, any, right? Sometimes when you open it, you will see that is 0.0.0.0/0, right? That is permitted to reach this critical database server that we're using as an example, right? So you see at that point, it becomes exposed. Everybody, your threat landscape is increased, and anybody can afford to now initiate any session into, the database server. Another thing we look out for is insecure ports, right? You see institutions tell you we have a hardening standard, right? In our hardening standard, we have specified that we don't want anything telnet, FTP, insecure FTP, telnet, and all that on our resources, right? Now, when you look at your firewall, right, you're able to look at the ports that have been enabled, right? Sometimes when you look at these ports that have been enabled, you see things like telnets there. You see tons of insecure ports that are there. And I know one time someone said, I think it was a review one time in my past life. Someone said, yes, it's opened. However, on the resource, there is nothing telnet that is there. And I told him, see, it's just a matter of time, right? If someone goes in deliberately to enable it, right, that traffic will flow. Defense is in layers. We keep talking about defense in depth, right? It is in layers, right? At the network side, let's ensure that the hygiene of our firewall is up to date, is is as much as possible, is free from all these things that could expose us, right? And let's deal with the endpoints on a different level, right? And that was where the person had to take it up because you can't be saying on my firewall I'm permitting telnet, but on the resource there is no telnet. It doesn't give a justification for enabling an insecure port on your firewall, right? There is no justification for that. So these are some of the things we need to look out for to our ports. Now, if you log into the firewall, sometimes, most times, the services on the port side is always created like a group, right? So when you expand the group, you see the various ports that have been enabled. It is nice to know what these ports are for. You can even see sometimes you have unnecessary ports that are opened, right? Unnecessary ports that are open. So take, for instance, you have someone who is accessing a web resource, right? You're going to a web resource within the institution. And typically you should have a 443 open, HTTPS, right? But you begin to see things like 3306, 152. You begin to see database ports, right? Or ports that do not align with the service that rule is expected to meet. It becomes a source of worry, right? Why are we having ports more than expected should be open, right? Now, these are questions that we as security guys we need to start asking ourselves that, okay, fine. Aside even the insecure ports, some of these services that are running, you know, why do we have these ports that are opened, right? And I'm going to, when we go to I think the next 2, 3 slides, I'm going to explain why some of these things happen, right? It's a question we need to ask. Let's look at our rules on Monday, on Tuesday. Let's begin to ask certain questions, right? There are some rules that are very clear, but when you look at the services, you begin to see some funny ports that are open that should trigger an inquiry. Let's discuss with the application owners to understand what this service is supposed to do and why do we have these ports open. Now, the other one is unauthorized management access. Now, what we're trying to say here is typically if you want to access or if you want to log into a firewall, that's for the firewalls I'm familiar with. aside the creation of your user on that device, right? They are also going to permit an IP. A static IP has to be assigned to you and it has to be permitted. You have a management list or access list, howsoever it's called across maybe Cisco, checkpoints, firewalls, and all that, right? Now, that IP has to now be permitted on the device itself, right? Now, what we've seen is sometimes the IPs of the people that have been permitted are people that have even left the department that are in charge of implementing these firewall rules, right? They've left the department, they're somewhere else, right? But the IP is still there. The network permission on the firewall is still there. No cleanup, right? Increasing your threat landscape too, right? So these are some of the things, or you even have decommissioned resources, right? You have decommissioned resources rule that still exists on the firewall. These are things that are pointing to the fact that a regular cleanup is not being done, right? So management access is key because if someone leaves maybe the department, goes to another department, the static IP is not either rotated or reassigned to someone else, right? The firewall rule is not cleaned up, right? You're still exposed one way or the other, right? So this is now a core aspect we need to look at when we are reviewing the firewall. Still on the common firewall misconfiguration. Sorry, am I still audible? So I'm sure that I'm communicating.
Yes, yes, you
Yes,
are
yes,
audible
yes.
to me.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is the test to production access. I tend to see this one a lot, right? In past life engagements, consulted to do some reviews. You tend to see this, right? You see rules that allow low trusting environments to connect to your production environment. I don't know if there are, uh, within us on this call, I'm sure some of us maybe in our workplace would have heard instances of someone saying that they were able to hop from test to production. And you begin to wonder, you know, of course, they're in separate VLAN, but the enforcer, right, was not properly done, right, which is the firewall. So you have rule. A simple, a live one I experienced was on the firewall, you had a group called production as the source, It was going to a critical solution in that institution, right? And I was like, okay, fine. Let me just blow up this group and let's see what we have there. Lo and behold, part of the objects in the group was a test resource that existed, right? So that rule gave it away. You had a test resource embedded in the group because these things, of a truth, they are created by humans, right? They are created by humans. Somebody might have raised a request, and when the implementer is implementing, something happened. Maybe he changed one of the octets to a very different number, and the number he changed it to is a test resource, right? It happens, and there was no adequate check after that, right? So there was a test embedded in a group called production. So if someone is looking at it, someone will say, oh, okay, maybe this is production resource going to, so it's a production. But no, it wasn't, right? We expanded it and we saw that, yeah, there was a test resource that existed that permitted communication to that critical resource on a management port, right? For that giving it away. For that giving it away. So this and it breaks, we talked about the network segregation. It breaks it. It breaks that environment segregation that we were talking about. And if someone is able to get into your test, it's just a matter of time before they cross to your production. Right. Now, excessive user privileges, I think I had spoken about something like that. You have a rule that permits, people in other departments. And one thing that is key is an experience, Institutions tend to have policies like rotation. They have rotation policies where people are leaving certain departments, going to other departments, and what have you, right? It tends to be a key risk factor here. You have people that have left the database team to somewhere else, right? And maybe the implementers were not duly informed of this. As a result, the person's IP is still there, and maybe there was no even communication to reassign the person's static IP or something, right? Person's IP is still there, being permitted to go to a database, even when the person is not even part of the team. So it's violating the least privilege principle, right? Now, another thing that we tend to see is also something called the shadow rule, right? Now, shadow rules are rules that are never used, right? Because something up overrides them, right? Now, so take for instance, you have a rule, you have two rules. Now, recall I say firewall matches from top to bottom, right? Now you have two rules. You have, let me give a statement. So the aim of this is we want to deny a certain VLAN from accessing a resource, right? We want to deny a certain VLAN from accessing a resource. So now you go on the firewall and you see number 10 of the, let's say it's number 10. Okay, yeah, number 10 of the rule is permits 172.16.0.0.6 172.16.0.0/16, right? Or let's trace it. You have a deny up first. You have a deny 172.16.10.0/24. So the first three octets is constant, while the last octet is the usable host, right? Now, you have a deny this guy to reach that resource, right? Let's say formally it was permit, but the aim was to deny that VLAN. So you go into the firewall, you go there, you're able to trace the rule number 10, deny 172.16.10.0/24. Then you go there, you change it to deny, or you disable the rule, right? Now, number 20 or number 25, you have permits. You have permit 172.16.0.0/16 to hit that resource. This is the risk shadowed rules carry. So in essence, you might be thinking that yes, we've disabled it. You've only disabled it on that level. When the firewall is processing and it gets to number 20, because 172.16.10 is a subset of 172.16.0, it is going to permit that traffic to go through, right? So shadowed rules is something that we need to watch out for. It creates a hidden risk, right? And it complicates rule management. So it's something that we need to watch out for. It might just be there lying fallow, because there is a top rule or there's something that is never used, it's just there lying fallow, right? The day you want to do a cleanup, you might think you have yanked off the one up. Meanwhile, there's someone down that is now going to permit it to start hitting. And that is when you now start to see hit count on that particular rule. The hit count will start increasing, So it's something that we need to watch out for. So incomplete deny rule, this is further buttressing what I said on the global deny rule, right? Where you have VLANs, right? You're trying to do a cleanup, but you want to first deal with the risk that exists. So you go up, maybe your third, fourth rule, you now create a global deny from test to production. Put all the test VLANs as source, put all the production VLANs as destination, and put the ports as any, right? So it's also important that we look at the source VLANs to be sure that it is complete, right? Completeness is now also a big deal here. So you might have a VLAN that might not be included as part of the global denial, the source IP. it now becomes, important for we to look at the completeness of, the groups that we've created. We have logging gaps, so sometimes maybe investigation is required, and you find out that your firewall is not being piped to a SIEM, and it becomes a tussle to be able to retrieve logs. So it becomes very critical to have your firewall pushing logs to a syslog server, right? Then architecture violations, like I spoke on before, you have firewall rules that have been created to break, for instance, the 3-tier architecture. The web should talk to the application, but sometimes you find out that guys outside the administrators are the ones that have now been permitted to reach the application server. Becomes a key issue, right? We need to look out for. So breaking down of architecture or architecture violations is also key. Moving on. So there are a lot of them, but we're just able to take the common ones. But why do these things occur? If we understand the why, then we can understand the how to tackle them, right? So why do we have or why do these misconfigurations occur? Now, the top of my list is governance, right? Now, firewall misconfigurations often stem from process failures, right? Process failures. I'll give you an instance. We did a review one time with an institution, and the question was, walk me through if non-so wants access to a resource within your environment. What's the process, right? And they explained that the process was to send a mail, right? When you send a mail, we'll treat it. It's not adequate to me, right? It's not adequate. We should be able to establish clear structures, right? Clear process flow with embedded controls in it. If I want to be able to create, if I request or if I want a rule to be created for me, for instance, right? Maybe a workflow, I initiate it, someone above me approves it, maybe an IT control or someone, and an assurance person is able to still review the why you need this, right? Before the person approves and before it gets to the implementer, even that too has a duty to also check these things. Do they meet the security standard that we have defined as an institution before even implementing? And after implementing, a post check should be done to ensure that, what this person actually implemented is in line with the request that was raised initially, right? We should be able to come up with documented process. And I know this is where we struggle as security guys to, start, how do I draft, and all this. And it becomes important that we draft this and implement this, right? Because what you don't document leaves room for inconsistency, right? Now, people begin to now treat things on how they feel. And trust me, the way I feel is different from the way someone else will feel, or is different from the way Ogatoni feels, right? So we need to establish clear structures, on how we want to be able to your operating procedure, develop hardening standards that will guide you. I know an institution that if they want to create rules, they will typically go through a workflow, right? However, if they want to do anything that has to do with configuration stuff on the firewall, right, and they go through change management, right? Have these things documented so it guides the quality of our review. Now, over time, when you ask for reviews that are being done, right, there is a focus on just zero hits. While it's good, right? It shows that maybe something has been done wrongly. That's why traffic is not counting. It's not just the only risk that exists. There are other things that exist on the firewall, which are some of the things that I have listed, right? So we need to have adequate reviews of our rules, right? It can be quarterly, depending on what the management is saying or depending on what the institution is taking on it. But we need to have sufficient review and adequate review of our firewall. Right? Absence of assurance tools, large environments, automated monitoring helps. It's not going to completely eradicate the risk, but it is going to help. What are some of the
Hello, guys. I think maybe Nonso has a network glitch. Let's just give a few minutes for him to get back.
sorry, I think network
All right.
kind of am I back
Yeah,
now? I'm
we can hear
clear.
you now. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So assurance tools, things like two-thing, like I was saying, it helps, but it doesn't completely eradicate the risk, right? What it does is it just limits the manual work that you do, right? No periodic audit, right, not being conducted. I know as I am speaking, I'm staring some sort of checks that one can do maybe by Monday, Tuesday, or the coming week, some of the things that we can just quickly, check through to see that our institutions are actually protected. So, periodically, without regular audits, misconfigurations accumulate over time, right? And compound the security risk. But don't get, if your governance properly, your audits find minimal issues, right? They find minimal issues. What are some of the remediation strategies that we can do? Build up governance framework, like I rightly said. We need to standardize process for rule creation, reviews, approval, conduct regular rule reviews, right? Comprehensive reviews, evaluating both the active and inactive rules. Let's not just limit it to just zero hit counts, right? Let's do quarterly assessments. Let's deploy automated assurance tool, if possible, to help quickly detect, some of these issues, especially if you work with a large institution, it becomes critical, right? SIEM integration, let's integrate with SIEM, and so that logs can be easily piped, right? I think I'm far. Time is almost on my side. So effective firewall security requires a proactive approach, right? Combining governance, technology, and continuous monitoring. Now, organization must move beyond reactive fixes, right? We don't just want, we detected this, let's deal with this. No, let's establish robust controls that will eliminate misconfigurations and significantly reduce our attack surface, right? Thank you for listening, and I'll stop here for my boss to.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nonso. Thank you. a bit technical, but like somebody requested, we'll drop the recording on the community WhatsApp group. But do we have any questions? Anybody, any questions? Maybe you just indicate with the raised hands and then we'll take them. I don't see anything in the chat at the moment. Any questions, guys? All right, so Ismail, go first, then BC. Go ahead, Ismail.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nonso, for the beautiful presentation on the firewall, the best practice to configure firewall, exactly. So my question is about, we have situations where we need public access. We need public access to some private resources, especially, let's say you have an agent, for example, you have some agent installed on endpoints like users' computers, maybe some specific users. Then you have maybe the server within your network that, okay, that server gets some information from this computer that has those agents. So, and with that architecture, as everybody is commuting or roaming around different locations, then your agent should be able to still communicate to your internal server. So with that kind of setup, need a public access to you need a public access through to your network. Now you have your firewall in place to do that configuration, to put the necessary controls in place to ensure that, okay, you enable the specific services that you want your agent to have access to the control server within your network. So having knowing this, so we have a situation where we have a public accessible service that you have to put on DMZ. You have maybe a web server in-house that everybody have to access it. So what about services like this that, okay, this service doesn't have to be accessible to all the public. So what is the best practice to put in place to ensure that, okay, you didn't open a lot of much of attack surface and ensuring that the controls are in place for this kind of setup?
Okay. Should I take Ismaila's question or wait for? Okay, let me take Ismaila's question before BC ask. Right. So Ismaila, if I get you well, you're speaking about we have resources in DMZ that is opened, right? Public, right? People have to access. How are we able to deal with this issue? Right. Now,
So sorry,
when is in DMZ?
before you go on,
Okay. Okay.
it does not necessarily have to be on DMZ. Let's say you have a public accessible. Let me create a two scenario. You have a web server in-house that has to be accessible by the internet, meaning every user have to access it. So you put your server on DMZ. That's a different setup. Now I'm talking about a server that does not have to be accessible by all the users on the internet, maybe some specific users. But because the server is in your private network, so you need a public access to it.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be
Okay.
a
Okay.
broad
Yeah.
access.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I get you now. So you have an internal server that specific people are supposed to go into, right? How are you able
Yes.
to do it? Not everybody on the internet, correct? So this is where VPN comes into play. Let me tell you the best architecture that I've seen so far for this, right?
Okay.
Now, for such scenario, right, what you typically have is you might have a VPN connection, right? And also is working remotely, for instance, and I need to reach a server. I have a VPN that when I initiate, right, it creates a tunnel for me, right? Now, on your perimeter firewall, what I'm going to explain is one of the institutions about their own practice, right? But you can decide to tweak it a little bit. Now, what they've done is when you come in on the perimeter firewall, it assigns you an IP. What you see on the perimeter firewall might be, maybe let's say also is in application support. You might see application at any, right? Going to that specific server, right? So once I create that VPN, it creates a secure tunnel for me. I come in, the checkpoint perimeter firewall or the perimeter firewall you have now is now able to assign you one of the IPs from the pool he has, right? And when it assigns you one of the IPs from the pool he has, I don't just go straight to the server. I go straight to a jump server, right? Like a bastion host, what you typically call a bastion host. Now, from the bastion host or the jump server, I can now jump into the specific resource that I want to access. So you don't necessarily need to start exposing things publicly. I see this thing common in AWS environments where certain servers are supposed to be reached. So what they do is they just give it a public IP and tell some people, keep it secret though, but just log in. No, you can have a bastion host, even in AWS, you can have a bastion host in a public subnet restricted to maybe the public side of your corporation, right? Then on the private EC2 instance, you cannot permit the security group of the bastion host to it or the private IP of the bastion host to it, right? But in a typical on-premise, you typically have your VPN. Your VPN will create a secure tunnel. You go to the firewall assigns you an IP from the pool. You use that IP to reach the jump server. Then from the jump server, you are not able, for you to get into the jump server, you have to authenticate to with your credentials, and you also have to be permitted, right? So they permit you to the jump server, then the jump server is now permitted to the specific server you want to reach. Does that create some clarity?
That's
Yeah.
that's a good one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. This is what you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chinaso, for that wonderful presentation. It's powerful. Okay, so I'm looking at the extensiveness of what any network group can achieve with firewall settings and configurations. So I'm coming from how management thinks of the significance or importance of investment in IT. So considering the enormity of what can be achieved with firewall in any organization. So why should, or what's the significance of now putting more investment on things like network access control, NAC, all those web application filtering and so on and so forth, considering it from how a management thinks about especially when it comes to cost control. I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, your question is clear. So you're asking that from the aspect of cost, right?
Yeah.
Why should an organization have firewall? Well, let's say, for instance, where you have an ACL on the router, for instance, right? Access control list that can help you in dropping traffic. Is that what you're saying? Right? That
No,
why should we also? Okay.
Okay, one thing is that having invest in firewall, I mean precisely next-gen firewall. So should organizations still go ahead, which I know you say yes, but from management perspective, should organizations still go ahead and invest in network access control, web application firewall, considering that some of these things you can still achieve with your firewall, with smart firewall? That's actually the question. Thank you.
That's actually your question. Yes. So,
Now, so should I help you?
yeah.
So
Okay.
Bibi, it's a valid ask, right? Because yes, management is worried about cost and all that. But you see, there are no silver bullets to dealing with security in an enterprise, right? And that's why controls are usually layered. So you begin to mature with that. So even though you have a firewall, in the event that a firewall is breached, is there something that my network access control hypothetically now, can do to prevent that breach, right? Is there something, if I manage access control properly, is it possible that that can also help prevent an attack, right? So controls are layered, and that will be your best way to manage. Even with all of this, sometimes you still see that the hacker manages to get through, either due to internal compromise and stuff like that. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you. It does.
All right.
Yeah. So BC to also add a bit of, so for instance, things like WAF, right? WAF has been built specifically to be able to deal with web traffic, right? So the extent a WAF will go, right, it's far deeper, web application firewall, far deeper than what a next-gen firewall will do. A next-gen firewall is layer 3 to 7, but a WAF is typically layer 7, right? That's its core. And like Tony said, there's no silver bullet. So you want to layer your organization to be sure that, yes, defense in depth, thank you, to be sure that you are well protected in the event that there is a breach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. So special thanks to all of us for joining, right? And hope to see you guys again next week. I hope that the session has been impactful. The resources, the slides, and the recordings will be available on the community WhatsApp group and on the LinkedIn page. Our objective here would have been achieved if on Monday you get back to your institutions and you try to check for some of these gaps. Discussing firewall, just cramping it up in 1 hour is a tough call. It is a session that you probably have for 3-4 days, right? But we've managed to compress this and just give you what you should need to at least go check your institution. So with that, I can say thank you for joining and see you guys next month. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone.